Lovely to see you all. I'm Rabbi Debbie Young-Summers. I am part of the rabbinic team at Adler and Hendon Reform Synagogue.
Hi, I'm Rabbi Erin London. I'm a freelance rabbi, Jewish educator, and chaplain.
Hi everybody, my name's Stuart. I'm Stuart Link. Work-wise, I'm a clinical psychologist, which means I work in the NHS full-time. And I'm responsible for working with people with complex mental health problems down in Camden, Islington. I think the reason I'm here is to kind of bring a psychological perspective to ritual and ceremony. And I suppose what's been important to me is I've been lucky enough to learn with Rabbi Zalman Schachter for many, many years. And he introduced me to using mikveh in a creative way, along with ceremony in a creative way and ritual. And I've been lucky also to be part of the Ruach Havorah, where we've been co-creating rituals for many, many years. So I hope to share some of that information as well.
So tonight we're going to talk about ritual and creating our own rituals and thinking about in what areas would we want to see ritual. You're going to be asked to put in a word or a few words. You can use more than one. What is a moment in your life you marked with a ritual, or one that you wish you had marked with a ritual? There's no right or wrong answer here, and hopefully if this all works as it's supposed to, as you start writing, the words are going to pop up. Miscarriage, reaching 50, IVF infertility, end of my menses, conversion, cutting my hair. But as we can see, there are lots of moments in our lives that either we would have wished to do a ritual, or perhaps we did a ritual. And we can think about what those rituals would look like. So now I'm going to hand this over to Rabbi Debbie and to Stuart.
I think reading that was very moving, actually. And you can just see just how important mikveh might be, or any kind of ritual might be, and how it's interesting that, Erin, you introduced it as mark an event. But I'm wondering also how a ritual can help with an event rather than just mark it. And I think that's the direction I'm coming from when I'm thinking about ritual and ceremony. And what I'm hoping to do is just in a few minutes is just explain a little bit of how I might think about how we can use ritual to help in that way. And also to, if you like, unveil what might be the deep structure of the ritual rather than the surface structure, to understand what it is we're trying to achieve and how that might work, rather than just what it looks like from the outside. And again, the thought is about empowerment. It's like we can all do this. You haven't got to be a rabbi, you haven't got to be a psychologist, you haven't got to be some great theatre director or whatever to create a ritual. We can all do it. It can be big or it can be small. It can involve one person, it can involve many people. So it's quite a broad canvas. But I just like to start with a little image of water, just because we're talking about mikveh. And if you could just, for a moment, just close your eyes, just for a second, close your eyes and just picture for yourself a pool of water. Doesn't have to be a mikveh, any pool of water, just for a second. And then if you want to, picture yourself entering into that water. Okay, you can open your eyes again now. That's very quick, very quick. What neuroscientists teach us is that by imagining things, we can change our state quite a lot. And probably what happens to most people when they do that, is that their stress response goes down. The catecholamines drop a little bit. It's a little bit more relaxed, just with the image of water. And there's a project called Blue Mind, which I came across when I was doing some research for this, which I think is largely a sales brochure for people who want to sell flats near a lake, overlooking a lake. I don't think it's about what we're about, but it just really highlights how we choose water to go near. We want to feel good. We go to the beach, or we might go surfing. We use water a lot, just in terms of helping us. So let me talk a bit about psychology now, rather than that one thing. So you can do psychology from the inside, or you can do it from the outside. And I want to talk a little bit about both, just briefly. So from the outside, there's quite a lot of research now, a bit of research into what goes on in a ritual, what happens in a ceremony, and what's useful. And most of it is people saying, well, it helps you to manage a difficult situation. It helps you to move from one space to another, what anthropologists call liminal spaces, moving from one space to another, where you don't really know where you are, and you need to find yourself in a new setting, a new place. And they talk about different kinds of processing, if you like, but sort of top down and bottom up. And it's all very technical, but essentially what they're saying is that the bottom up is stuff you're doing. It's feeling your feet on the floor. It's the environment that you're in. It's movement of some kind. It may be music. It's something that coming in that is from the outside. And from the top down, the inside are all the traditions, the learnings, the teachings, the ancestry, if you like, of the ritual. And these two things combine and you need both to make a ritual meaningful and helpful. And we see it all the time. If you go to synagogue, you go to shul, and you just see that the whole ceremony of bringing the Torah out and putting it back, you can see all the different elements that are really crafted, established, experienced ceremony going on. And if you do a blessing in the context of that, it loads masses of meaning into it. Or if you look at Havdalah, for example, where you're leaving the safety of Shabbat and moving into the rest of the week, all the senses are there, and all the elements of song and music, but also smell and taste, they're all part of that. So that's, if you like, from the outside and inside, up and down. But if you're thinking now about how we might want to experience the ritual ourselves, how we might want to create something, there are some stages that it's worthwhile thinking about going through. These are not written down in any kind of stone. They're just sort of things that are useful. And it's the idea of a ritual being a process, that you start in one place, you do things that move you to somewhere else, and then you come back again. So it's a mini journey that you're undertaking. And if you can imagine going into the mikveh, can be a mini journey from where you start, you enter into it, you undress, you enter the water, you go with a certain intention, or kavanah in Hebrew, and then you come out. So I'm just going to describe a few of those kind of steps and then hand over to Debbie. So the first thing is at the beginning, is really getting your feet on the ground, is be grounding, is knowing where you are, is establishing yourself, feeling secure in your setting. You don't just jump into it, you have a kind of process to get there. And then it's identifying perhaps what you're feeling, the emotions, kind of what's happening for you right now, being in touch with those things. Some of those things you may know in advance and you may bring with you. Other things you may find as a surprise and experience when you actually get into the ceremony. And then there's all the words and all the thoughts and the images that you might have, and the prayers and the poetry that you might bring with you, or it might be suggested to you, or you might create spontaneously when you're actually engaged in the ritual. And then there's that moment of openness, if you like, when you allow yourself to be open to whatever's happening right now, right there and then. It may be a surprise, it may be something unexpected. And then I'm really rushing through this because of time, and maybe in the small groups we can explore it in more depth. But then there's leaving. There's the return journey, if you like, the coming back, half of the circle that's coming back. And that's when you maybe start to grasp for some insights into what it was you just experienced. Maybe some naming of it, maybe some establishing it in yourself. Again, noticing what you're feeling, and then returning back to where you started, to that setting that you're in, to the establishing back where you are, and maybe recording what you've done, sharing what you've done with somebody else if you want to, maybe keeping a diary, writing it down, making some notes for yourself. So that's really rushed, and we can have more time to go into that another time. I just wanted to say that there's nothing new in this. This is sort of really old, and if you haven't seen it, I just dragged out Aria Kaplan's book Waters of Eden, which is quite a useful kind of solid text on what mikveh is. And I just want one sentence or two sentences from his book, which just shows us that this way of grasping mikveh is not particularly new. So I'm reading, says that the Hebrew word for wash, rachatz, is more accurately translated as purify with water. And Rabbi Samshul Raphael Hirsch points out that also phonetically related to the word ra'atz, which means to overthrow or break down. So when the Torah speaks of washing, it's essentially speaking of self-nullification and a breaking down of the ego, which is the essence of spiritual purification. So I'm just sharing that because I want to say this is there in another source, not just in the modern sources that we might be going to. And from that, I'll hand over to Debbie to elaborate.
Thank you, Stuart. So I mean, this is a really unique opportunity in a way that I've certainly never had the pleasure before of talking about mikveh alongside someone who specializes in the psychotherapy of it, because I think so many of our rituals as Jews are very cleverly designed psychologically to help us live better. You know, particularly those that deal with death, for example, I think are there to help us really feel what we need to feel and go back out into the world to live well. And mikveh is a fantastic resource in the toolbox of Jewish spirituality to help us do some of that. As a rabbi, having mikveh in my toolbox has meant when someone comes to me and says, I'm looking for a ritual for, my mind almost always goes straight to mikveh. And please God, we'll have a site at which to do it that is honouring that ritual really well soon. But as Stuart said, mikveh, of course, is not a new thing, is not a new idea. And in fact, Rashi would argue that it starts at Mount Sinai, at that moment of receiving revelation. And it was when the children of Israel, this rabble of Hebrew slaves, essentially, went through the most enormous moment of transition, where they themselves became the Jewish people. Rashi says that they all immersed in a mikveh at Mount Sinai. I'm not going to talk about the logistics of how that would have worked, but that's the argument. And of course, you know, mikveh has remained a ritual at the heart of Jewish life for all the thousands of years since then. Classic uses of mikveh are all transitional moments, conversion, marriage, and even niddah, the menstrual purity laws. These are moments of transition and change. The classic article that for the last sort of 40 years on that has been Rachel Adler's 1970s article, where she talks about how mikveh and niddah is a cycle that represents the dark and light in our life that are completely normal and natural, and that we all go through these light and dark times, or cycles even of life and death. However, a lot of people still teach and use this beautiful Rachel Adler framing, which I would really strongly recommend to everybody to explore. But very few people teach her follow-up article in the 1990s. She wrote in Tikkun magazine a kind of rebuttal of her own thesis, where she talks about how she actually can't stand by a lot of what she had argued in the first article, but she says the one really seminal thing that came out of that piece of work for her, and that really surprised her, was that Jews across the world of all gender really embraced the ritual of mikveh as a ritual of transition and to mark these incredible, powerful moments in our lives. So why does mikveh work so well for that? I think there are lots of elements of it that do this. The first is water. You know, as we imagined that pool of water, I imagine you didn't imagine a stinky, stagnant pool in the local woods, but probably some gorgeous turquoise clear pool somewhere. Certainly that's what was in my head, that I've never seen. But actually water is a very powerful tool. It represents washing, but that doesn't have to be washing something away, although it could be. It could be adding layers to who you are. It can be womb-like, it can be birthing. it can also be a place of tears, right? The number of times I have cried in a mikveh, no one needs to know, no one needs to care that you are crying in the mikveh. The water is all there together. And quite often the mikveh is a ritual that you can do alone. Very often you might have an attendant, and at the Wellspring project we're hoping to have very well trained attendants and guides who will work with people and accompany them if they want, although they don't have to accompany you. But actually to have a space ritually in Judaism that you can go alone is quite unusual, right? So much of what we do as a community is about family and food and being together and community. It's all the things that we've missed this year, really. But actually the mikveh is this really unique space that allows us to be vulnerable, completely naked if, you know, following the traditional way of doing it, completely as we are created before our maker, no makeup, no jewelry, no pretense. And that ability to strip back and be vulnerable before our maker, I think or before ourselves, is a very powerful opportunity. And that has led to an enormous range of things that people have used it for in the last sort of 30, 40 years, particularly. Although who knows whether this has always happened. In the Orthodox world, women are very frequently encouraged, and I was encouraged as a user of an Orthodox mikveh, to pray, to use the monthly immersion opportunity to pray for things well beyond what might be going on in the mikveh. And we have no idea how mikveh might have been used through the ages, but it may well have formed a part of people's transitional moments. Some of the moments that I've had the pleasure of working with people on are things like special birthdays, ordinations, finishing chemotherapy, coming out of lockdown. Please God, we'll be using that one soon. Celebrating a divorce and mourning a divorce, both have come, as well as, you know, recreating the wedding mikveh, recreating conversion ceremonies to add to them, to embellish them, to enhance them, completing gender transitioning, processing childhood trauma caused by abuse, all sorts of, you know, as much as your mind can imagine, and much more. And we don't even have the mikveh yet, right? The potential is enormous once we have this beautiful tool. One last thing to reflect on in the construction of a mikveh, and how we might begin to think about how we use what is at our fingertips. You can see in the Wellspring logo, there are, if you count them, 7 steps represented. Traditionally, a mikveh is built with 7 steps down. 7 is a very sort of mystical, powerful number in Judaism that represents completion, wholeness. And those 7 steps can be a part of thinking through what it is that we're transitioning through. What are those 7 steps meaning for us? What does wholeness and completion feel like for us? What do we need the mikveh to be? And there are different customs as to how people immerse once they are in the mikveh. Some people would do 7 immersions, that reflecting that 7ness again. We can use the same model. The vast majority, though, traditionally would use 3 dips. Correct me if I'm wrong, anyone who knows otherwise, but traditionally, generally, I think the majority of the Jewish world do 3 immersions when they dip. And many people who are creating these special rituals have started to use those 3 as a representation of past, present, and future, giving us cover, not a framework, to really think about, okay, where have I come from? Where am I now? And where do I want to be going? I actually started reframing that a long time ago, probably 10 or 15 years ago, as past, future, and present. Because for me, I think when we perform these rituals, to end in the present is quite powerful. To be where we are as we leave the mikveh, for me, has been very important. But, you know, either can work for whoever it is. The reality is everyone needs something different out of the mikveh experience. You know, no 2 conversions have been the same journey, even though that might be the most commonly used purpose of going to mikveh. Every use is different, and probably every niddah immersion is different too, right? All these emotions that we bring to the mikveh, to this opportunity to be vulnerable. So tonight, hopefully, we're going to have an opportunity to help you think creatively and deeply about how we can really elevate the Mikvah experience to be something that works for the things that you need it to work for.
Conscious that it was a very quick conversation. It was a bit of a challenge to think, how do we, think about creating a ritual with 1 hour? So please do join us for future events. Go to the Wellspring website. You can sign up for updates. You can follow us on social media so that you get up to date with what's going on. There we go. Thank you, Rachel. So on Facebook and on Instagram, and going to the website. You can also donate. Ultimately, we would love to have that building and to be able to get together. And if you feel able to donate, then please do. Also, just to say a huge thank you to Stuart and Rabbi Erin and Rabbi Debbie for holding the space and explaining so beautifully what mikveh and what ritual means for them and how that can really enrich our lives in many ways. So thank you to you and to all the volunteers. Lynette particularly has been really helpful with pulling the session together today. So thank you all for bringing, for joining us, and for everything that you've brought, for sharing your experiences and your thoughts, and hopefully we'll have further opportunities to talk both personally and also about the Wellspring project. Thank you all very much and good night.